Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my Static Strike Shockwave Slayer. As my second build, I wanted a low maintenance, high damage and movement speed mapper that would be able to tackle tanky essences and metamorphs while still being incredibly fast, and I'm happy to say I found it. We use Static Strike in combination with the Shockwave support gem. Whenever we hit an enemy with Static Strike, we get a lightning aura around us that hits enemies with beams several times per second. These beams can actually proc the Shockwave support gem, resulting in what you're currently seeing on the screen. For damage scaling, strength stacking with Replica Oberon's Warpath and Battlemage's Cry plus Redblade Banner and Iron Will just make the most sense, as we get a lot of upfront flat damage and also increased damage. Since we're using cooldown skills, the missing attack speed that is usually a downside doesn't really matter at all. We also use Slayer to, on top of all the more damage, the extra attack speed, and also the 20% call, get an extra recovery mechanic with Brutal Fervor, making the build that much more comfortable to play, especially against damage over time effects. This has been one of the most fun builds I've played in a while, I gotta say, and it being a melee build that doesn't feel clunky to play is just a cherry on top. With that being said, let's get into the build portion of the video. Alright, so before we start discussing some of the juicier stuff like items, skill setups, and passive tree, I want to quickly talk about Static Strike itself, why we chose it over something like Cyclone as sort of a shockwave delivery machine. So whenever you hit an enemy with Static Strike, you get a sort of a lightning aura around you that zaps out at enemies around you periodically, making it usually a pretty bad choice because you can't really scale its damage with attack speed. The beams hit enemies every 0.32 times cannot be scaled whatsoever, other than maybe an alternate quality or something like that, which we actually do not want. The tick rate is exactly where we want it to be, a little bit more on that later. So the idea is that you go onto an enemy, you hit it once, and then you have this aura around you. Now, the base duration is only 3 seconds, which definitely makes it so we need to scale more, so we get 45% increased duration from the helmet, and then we also take this whole cluster here, also the mastery for the 10% more skill effect duration, which means we end up at a duration of 6.27 seconds. So every 6.27 seconds, we hit an enemy and we get the aura again. Now, so far, so good. Static Strike is not really known for its crazy damage. So how do we make it so screens explode like in the intro? Well, this is where the Shockwave support comes in. Now, Shockwave is a support that actually procs Shockwaves, the big things that you saw in the intro. With the MTX, this actually has an MTX. And just to point this out real quickly, because a lot of people will want to know, what I'm using is the Apollyon Shockwave effect. Without this, it will look nowhere near as impressive. There's obviously no difference in terms of playstyle, but it doesn't look as bright. So for people who don't like the brightness, just don't buy this. And for people who want the flashiness like me, definitely buy it. So you also see this has quite a high amount of damage, attack damage, 265 plus 3% of base damage at level 21. It also has cooldown recovery per level. It gets radius per level. So the cooldown recovery at the end will actually be on 0. What was it again? Let's go to Shockwave. 0.627 seconds, which means on average you get 1.59 shockwaves per second. Another thing to know about Shockwave is that it has uses. So these basically store up if you don't use the cooldowns anytime soon. For example, you go from pack to pack, it's going to store some shockwaves, and then it's going to proc all of them at once you get to the next pack. Now, to understand why exactly Shockwave and Static Strike fit so well together, we have to talk about Shockwave in general, how this scales its damage, right? So this basically has the same damage as your main skill. It has a base damage that is completely revolved around your weapon and also every sort of added damage that you get. However, just like Static Strike, it does not scale with attack speed, making it very synergistic. So Shockwave gets worse as a support the more attack speed you have. If you think about it, the faster your attacks get, the cooldown still does not get reduced. So at some point, a Divergent Shockwave is just a lot worse than maybe another damage multiplier. Now, a problem though is that if you want to make Shockwave good, you have to have low attack speed, and playing with low attack speed, as everybody knows, just absolutely sucks. It feels clunky and it is bad for clear speed. And to get around that downside, what people used to do is use Cyclone, which is very clever because no matter how fast you attack with Cyclone, it will always look the same. So if you think about how Cyclone works, you basically spin around and it doesn't matter how often this hits. You're always going to have the same movement speed that you get around. If you had to stand there and like cast something like, I don't know, some kind of strike ability, it would be terrible, right? Like you would be this, and then you have to move again, low attack speed, low attack speed. But with Cyclone, it doesn't matter. But the second thing that not that many people actually tried is using Static Strike. And since Static Strike's beams actually let you proc the shockwaves, all you have to do is cast a Static Strike every 6.2 seconds, and then the shockwaves just get proc while you're walking, similar to this. Let's quickly do this. So shield charge into pack, boom, we hit once, and now we can just shield charge around or move, and everything around us dies. Yeah, that is basically why Static Strike is so strong. And once again, it has the same scaling. It doesn't want any attack speed, so it just fits perfectly well with Shockwave. Now, one very important thing that I get asked a lot is, why am I not using Phantasmal Static Strike? Because this actually increases the beam frequency, which should just be OP, right? Why am I using chains? So it's not really about the chains themselves. Chains are very nice. I think out of these three qualities here, the increased damage, skill effect, duration, and this one, this is the best one. The reason I'm not using Phantasmal is that it's actually a downside. So right now, our proc frequency with Static Strike is every 0.2 seconds. If you times 2 that, so every second beam with the Static Strike, you get at 0.64 seconds, which pairs really well with the skill cooldown, because after 6.027 seconds, the Shockwave is going to be back up on cooldown. However, if I used the Phantasmal Static Strike right here, Phantasmal, the 20% beam frequency, I would be on a beam every 0.288 seconds. If I times 2 that, we come out to 0.576 seconds. So every second beam, the next Shockwave is not going to be up. So what's going to happen is I have to wait for another 0.288 seconds, basically only proccing a Shockwave every 0.864 seconds. So it is important, number one, that you do not get Static Strike too fast. So a level, I think it starts at level 23 or 24. It actually zaps every 0.31. This is already bad. You do not want this. You want to be at 32. Right here. So that is level 20 onwards. Just don't try anything with extra levels. I think it starts, yeah. So do not get this to level 23 or higher. Otherwise, you will cut off your cooldown reduction. It will not proc as regular. Now, another nice thing about not scaling attack speed is you can make use of Frozen Legion. Already, a lot of people have been trying this. It is an incredible burst against single target. And what this does is basically it summons these statues around you. So when I press this, right here, you can see it has 6 charges. So it's going to summon 6 dudes around me. And these all overlap against single targets. And once again, it's cooldown based like Shockwave. It doesn't scale with attack speed like Static Strike. It is just perfect for the build. We only have it on a 4 link, but you can also put it in a 6 link if you already know that you're going to fight a boss that you want to burst out the phases with. Another reason why not scaling with attack speed is really strong is because you can make use of Pulverize. Usually this has a huge downside, less attack speed. On these builds, it isn't. This is straight up a support gem that gives you 71% more damage. Now then, let's talk about strength stacking. Why is strength stacking my #1 form of scaling on this build? And in order to understand that, we kind of have to look at what strength stackers get their damage from. And that is mostly flat damage, which is incredibly good for Shockwave. It doesn't have anything to do with attack speed. It is just straight up flat damage. Whether you go all bronze or you go Brutal Sled Sprinkler, or you maybe even have the relic that scales extra for strength, whatever it is incredibly strong. And the second vector is you get a lot of increased damage with Iron Will and Battlemage's Cry. So that means that your payoff from strength stacking is straight up increased damage and flat added damage. That is perfect for what we're trying to do. The second reason is we get the AoE per 50 strength mod on maces. This can only be gotten on maces. It's the mod down here. 3% increased area of effect per 50 strength. At our current strength, which is 2,291, if we divide that by 50 and then times 3 that, we will see that our current strength and this mod alone gives us 137% global area of effect. And this does not only count for the Shockwave AoE, as well as that it also counts for the Static Strike area around you, where it can actually zap enemies. Now, strength stacking also allows us to easily swap our damage against single target. Where do I have it? Yeah. So Replica Frost Breath is just incredibly strong. Swap for single target. Now, just to be clear, I did not use this in any of the videos. It is just something that gives you an extra 40% more damage or something. So if you want a gem swap, it's there. If you don't care about AoE and you want to do content that's more about bossing, that is probably your main weapon. But I will still put it here as an option. Basically, attacks with this weapon deal double damage to chilled enemies. Since your chaos damage can chill, this is straight up just double damage, and it soaks up all the flat damage from your warpath and doubles it. Now, the third reason to go Strength Stacker is you get easy rage regeneration with Chaos Spirit. A lot of people who are doing this kind of build are going Berserker, which I'm not 100% sure why, because you don't really need to. So Strength Stackers are notorious for having a high HP pool. They lack the spell suppression that the right side of the tree has. It's going to be really hard to get to 100%. But we have a high HP pool, making it a good all-rounder. What this also means, though, is that the higher your HP pool is, the better percentage regen gets. For example, a normal build that might have 4,500 life, if it gets 1% regen, that's pretty easy. You get 45% life regenerated per second. However, for example, this build here has 6,857 times 0.01. We're looking at 68 life regen, which matters for Chaos Spirit because it gives you 1 rage regen per 100 life recovery. It doesn't care about the percentage. It just cares about flat. So yeah, this just makes it a lot easier. We have around about 80% Berserk uptime just with this. And all I have to do is I have a flask with 3% life regen. I have some nodes that I would take anyways. I get regen here, 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 as well as that I'm using a Rational Doctrine for an extra 5% regen from the Consecrated Ground, or you can just take Hardy. Now, if you've never played a Strength Stacker before, you might be confused. Why the hell am I taking Iron Will? Isn't this just for spell damage? Why the hell am I playing Redblade Banner? I'm going to quickly explain this. So basically, there's a combo with Battlemage's Cry and Redblade Banner that gives you a lot of increased damage. So Battlemage's Cry is intimidating as hell, right? But the only line that you have to care about on this, or by far most important one, is buff makes increases and reductions to spell damage also apply to attacks at 25% of the value per 5 power, up to a maximum of 150%. So at maximum, you get 150% of value. So what that means is 1% increased spell damage is 1.5% increased attack damage. And this is not just for exerted attacks. This is only while the duration is up, and the duration is like 11 or 12 seconds because we're scaling duration anyways. So what you have to know is with the shield here, war cries have infinite power. You're always at maximum. So that means there's no way around this shield, because otherwise it's going to be way too inconsistent. It's basically impossible. And just to quickly make you understand that this is not just a little bit of a buff, this is basically the build when it comes to strength stacking if you build around it. I will just quickly disable Battlemage's Cry here, and you can look at our DPS. It goes from 24 million to 2.7 million. So that is the strength of a strength stacker with Iron Will. You also have the shield in here, the Battlemage's Cry, and there's also the Iron Fortress that makes it so your strength bonus is even bigger. Strength stacking also allows us to basically get this mod right here. It is 1% increased critical strike chance per 10 strength, which for us is straight up 220% increased crit, and it fixes our accuracy completely. Gain accuracy rating equal to your strength, which is very, very valuable if you're on the left side of the tree. Let me quickly show you a map with this build so you can kind of get a feel for it. We have Withering Step on our left mouse button, which is always going to apply. Then it goes back on cooldown. It's basically our main way of applying Wither. We have Blood and Sand, which is going to give us more area of effect whenever we're mapping. And whenever we go up against bossing, we switch it and we deal more damage. We tap our Static Strike every 6 seconds or so. We have to hit an enemy to help us out that it's not too clunky. We also get +1 additional strike. So even if, like, in the midst of things, you kill something with your shield charge and then you don't get a hit in, the extra strike is still going to get a hit in, rocking your Static Strike. Battlemage's Cry, we have to press every, I think, 11 seconds or so, 12 seconds actually, yeah. It also gives us Onslaught from one of our medium cluster jewels. Then we have Berserk, which gets auto-cast by the Battlemage's Cry. Now, if you want to time it more correctly, you can also press it. I'm very lazy. I don't want to press too many buttons. And whenever Val Haste is up, you can also press that. And all we're going to do after the Static Strike procs is we're going to shield charge around. There's also the Frozen Legion right here against single target damage. So let's quickly try this one out here. So I press Battlemage's Cry. We're shield charging around. One target, boom. And now we just have to move around. So as you can see right here, damage is pretty legit. Let's get our Smuggler's Cache right here. Get a little bit faster. Now, yeah, all you have to do is now you shield charge around. Now, the good thing about the MTX as well is you will see that whenever it's not up, you have to press Static Strike again. If you do it without, actually I'm gonna unequip the MTX for a second to show you what I mean. If you don't have the MTX, sometimes it can be awkward to know when you have to press Static Strike again. So that is also very, very nice. But all we're doing here is kind of shield charging around. So let's do this. Let's loot a little bit. This is basically how you would play a normal map. As you can see right here, whenever there's a single target, I'm pressing Frozen Legion. I don't even get to, that's how much damage I have at this point. Obviously, it's different depending on what your gear level looks like. And let's quickly unequip the MTX so you can kind of see what I mean. Now, I'm going to activate it right here. Boom. And you can see there's like this gory effect, but you can't really see it all that well. It's obviously way nicer on the eyes, but it might be awkward to know whenever your static strike is not up. Obviously, so it's not as fancy. So next up, let's talk about defensive layers. I leveled all the way to level 99 while doing juiced essences and metamorphs. And not only did I do metamorphs, I did metamorphs with fine specimen. And this is partially possible because I'm a slayer, and I'm going to go over that in a bit. We have 6 to 7.5k life, depending on how you spec it. We have 75%, so capped block from the Iron Fortress. We already get 30% chance to block from the shield, so we need 45% from the Iron Fortress. So if we do the math, 50 times 45, in order to be block capped, you need 2,250 strength. Then we have Slayer Overleach, which is incredibly valuable because we have Chaos Roots, so our regen is not applied. That is also the reason why we're Slayer, but we're not using Vaal Pact. Vaal Pact does not work with Chaos Spirit. It does override it, so we don't have any regen at all, so we also wouldn't gain any rage regen. But I don't think I have to say much more when it comes to Overleach. It's just super comfy, and also we get 10% reduced damage taken while leeching, which, as you might guess, is always. So then we have 30 to 40k armor, plus Molten Shell. Something that helps us out a lot when it comes to armor is that we have Warning Call, which with the shield together always gives us 100% increased armor because we always add infinite power. Then we also have a very high berserk uptime, as I said, around about 80%. It also depends on how you spec, how much HP you have, what kind of gear you have. And we also have stun immunity, pretty fair and square with unwavering stance. This league in particular, I feel like I'm getting stunned a lot more than usual, so it's just a no-brainer. As for Pantheons, we're using Soul of Arakali. This makes up for a lot of our weaknesses, which is, for example, Chaos Res. We only have like 27 or something. Against damage over time, which is the most important one when it comes to Chaos Res, this gives us plus 40%, 10% reduced damage taken, huge. Also, increased recovery rate of life and energy shield if you stop taking damage over time recently. We're not using Blood Rage. Blood Rage usually bricks this effect, but we're not using it. So this straight up gives us a 20% more multiplier to our Overleach, and then debuffs on you expire 20% faster. Not that important. When it comes to small one, if you're doing Searing Exarch Altars, you definitely want to get the Unaffected by Burning Ground. Otherwise, you can do like some bleed stuff, for example. We are not bleed immune. I can usually leech over it, but you can take Soul of Ralakesh as well. Now let's quickly talk about Slayer. For me personally, there's two ways to go about this build. You can either go Slayer or Occultist. I actually had an Occultist for my League starter, so I was kind of thinking I would just respec and it's going to be fine, but the problem that I found was I couldn't really make the regen work, especially with Chaos Spirit, and I really wanted Berserk because it just feels completely awesome to play. What you do get is Void Beacon, you do get Withering Presence, but these two are just damage multipliers. Slayers has them as well. Unholy Authority is really not that good anymore. You do get Assassin's Mark on top, but it's not as crazy as it used to be. You don't get Malediction anymore. The big selling point was Profane Bloom. The thing is, when I tried it out, I actually found out that I don't really need it. We have so much AoE, I didn't even feel the difference all that much. Even with this being global AoE, my thought was, well, this has global AoE, which also counts for the explosion, but it wasn't that impressive, which is why I ended up with Slayer. First up, you get a lot of quality of life. The accuracy we don't really need, other than against evasive enemies, I guess. Plus 4 melee strike range means that static strike, whenever you have to hit every 6 seconds, is a lot less clunky. It easier finds a target. We get the 50, actually 60% AoE with the small note here. That is on top of the AoE we already have, so we get like, I don't know, over 200%, and also it's 15% more damage. Overleach fixes the problem with us having no regen, and then we have just all-around incredible nodes like Bane of Legends, which gives us more damage against unique enemies, or while we're clearing 10% more damage. Also, all the small nodes give attack speed, and this also gives us Leech, which just is absolutely incredible. It makes the build feel better, and then we obviously get the big payoff with Headsman. Now, when it comes to gear, let's quickly knock this out of the park. When it comes to Relic, there's a lot of mods that are okay. There's nothing really crazy. The Strength mod doesn't work because Alberon says cannot deal non-chaos damage. We're going to go to that later, though, because there is a very expensive upgrade where you could make this build like explode in damage ×2 ×3. But let's quickly talk about this. The number one mod here would either be, I guess, Intimidate is okay, although it doesn't stack well with Wither, but the best would probably be Warcry buff effect, because it makes Battlemage's Cry convert the Iron Will spell damage at even a higher ratio instead of 150%. When it comes to this build, the item you can't get around is Replica Alberons and Iron Fortress. Replica Alberons is very expensive, obviously. What this does is it adds 1 to 80 chaos damage to attacks per 80 strength. The reason these boots are so insane versus something like a Brutus Lead Sprinkler is Brutus Lead Sprinkler is a weapon already, so you cannot use a stat stick or something that has something like, I don't know, gives you just 130% ink AoE. You can use the boots as your flat damage, and on your weapon, you just have all these utility stats. Then we have Iron Fortress, which makes it so strength damage bonus instead grants 3% increased melee physical damage. This is basically converted to all attack damage with the Iron Will, so it doesn't only count for physical. So that's straight up a lot more increased damage. I think it's around about 20 or 30% more damage. It also has a high damage roll, a high strength roll, sorry. It also gives you 1% block chance per 50 strength, which gives us 45% block chance exactly, which makes it so we're at 75 capped together with the 30% from the shield. It does have reduced movement speed, but it's not less movement speed. It just goes against all the increases you have. Then we have Chaos Spirit. Since we have so much HP, we're at like around about 6 to 7.5 HP, depending on your gear. We get a lot of rage region per second. I think for me currently it's like 9 rage per second, which is basically like old Chainbreaker would be. So it's just incredible. The helmet makes it so our accuracy is fixed, and the enemy also gets minus chaos resistance. Also, we get a lot of increased critical strike chance per 10 strength. This is a Maven mod, a elevated mod. The normal mod is just gain accuracy rating equal to your strength, and if you elevate that, you also get the crit strike chance mod. This is absolute GG. The helmet overall, other than these two mods, it's pretty janky. I just kind of ripped it. I didn't have the currency to finish it. Then as for our weapon, I started out using a boom mace because I wanted to scale the fiery impact. If you don't know, this does actually scale all your chaos damage, even though it sounds like it is like a fire skill. It doesn't matter. All your added damage applies to the skill. It's like a melee attack. It has a cooldown of 2 seconds, but it does have decent burst damage. My first thought was I'm actually going to put supports in here and actually make it stronger, but that didn't really end up happening because then I put in Frozen Legion, and then we were so socket starved that there was just no way to go about it. So is Boom Mace the best way to go about it? Just look at the mace spaces. Maybe there's something that attacks faster. It's going to be more comfy. Boom Mace is decent, I guess. All I have here is I have crit, attack speed. You definitely want the penetration. You need the penetration from either the craft, which goes up to 13, or the veiled version, which goes up to 16 that I have here. And as a craft at the end, I put spell damage, because once again, spell damage does actually count as attack damage while we have Battlemage's Cry. And then the shield is an absolute no-brainer. You basically have to use it, otherwise the Battlemage's Cry interaction doesn't work. Look at the intro again. As for jewelry, all that we're looking for is as much strength as we possibly can. Now, my gear is by no means perfect. As you can see here, I don't have 2 increased strength rings. These are actually quite expensive right now. I was able to snag one in week 1, but I didn't get the second one then. Obviously, you would want both. This is the Symphysis Implicit that you would want. You want to craft these with Essences of Rages, or you want to spam crit multi-essences until you hit tier 1 strength. Either way, very, very strong. If you can get some resistances in there, you don't want to get starved, so you definitely need them. You get a little bit from the passive tree, but not that much. What you want from all 3 of your jewelry is minus mana cost. It will make it way more consistent, and at the end, we're only going to have 25 mana left. However, if you, for some reason, can't get that on one of your pieces, you will have to go for Determination has increased mana reservation efficiency. So otherwise, you can also get a little bit of Chaos Res. Chaos Res, we're actually really starved. We don't really get any. Crit multi is really important. Not much else to say here. You can get a Eyes of the Great Wolf with percentage attributes and crit multi, or percentage attributes and maximum life. Those are fine. If you can make a good amulet here, that's even better. The GG amulet would have strength, crit multi, and plus to all attributes. That would be GG. And then obviously life and minus mana in the prefix. As for belt, there's a few budget options, namely just crafting a heavy belt or maybe getting a Cyclopean coil. However, at least as of this recording, a belt like this isn't that expensive, but you never know, right? What I did is I just crafted it with strength essences, which is rage essences, until I got okay life. The energy shield doesn't really do anything. It's just lightning res, and you want to have a suffix open because the increased cooldown recovery rate craft is actually really important because you can reach another breakpoint for your Shockwave. This is especially important because the second source of cooldown recovery that you usually get, which is boots, you cannot because you need Alberons. So then we have our flasks, which is Quartz Flask. I really like just walking through enemies. We have percentage regen to work together with our Chaos Gloves to get more rage regen per second. It's just going to be more consistent. Obviously, movement speed as much as possible. Granite Flask with increased armor, pretty self-explanatory. A Diamond Flask, as much crit as we can possibly get. And then Witchfire Brew, makes it so we don't need a Despair on hit ring. Also, it applies the full level 21 Despair instead of just a level 1 like the Curse on hit would. Now, when it comes to unique jewels, the most important one is your Lethal Pride. This basically gives you a ton of strength. Now, there's a Timeless Jewel, so wherever you put it in, I put it in here. It really depends on how you path and how you path. We're going to talk about that in the passive skill tree. But basically, what you're looking for is on your notables. We're looking for percentage strength. You're looking for Warcry buff effect and also double damage. You don't have much here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 notables, so we get a total of 10% strength and 10% chance to deal double damage, which is already insane, but all the small nodes also get +2 strength. Then we have the split personalities, which are going to fix our int and our dexterity while also giving us a ton of strength. So this is basically the way why we're pathing like this is at the end here, we want the split personalities. In our case, we want it here. And the longer you make this chain, for example, also the medium, the more you get from this. For example, this one jewel gives me 55 strength and 55 intelligence. It is limited to 2, so just think about that. And the other one comes in here. Once again, this really much depends on how you path. Then a no-brainer jewel is basically Emperor's Might. It's just really, really strong. There's also Emperor's Mastery, which as of this recording costs like 60 divines. All I can tell you is don't buy it until you have everything else on this build already. It looks like an insane jewel, but it's actually not that much crazier than a jewel like this, which fixes your resistances, gives you crit multi, percentage lives. So don't waste your money. You would have to have, I don't know, already 500 divines invested into this build before Emperor's Mastery actually is worth buying. Now, the same goes for Rational Doctrine, by the way. The thing is, I bought this one early at current prices, which I think is like 26 divines. I definitely wouldn't buy one. The thing that this gives you is if your strength is your highest attribute, you get Consecrated Ground around you, which means you get 5% regen, which means it's a lot more cozier to have your Berserk up. That's all this jewel does for me. I have enough damage, so I just thought I'd put it in here. Don't buy this if you don't need it. You want one jewel with Corrupted Blood immunity. It's quite important. Also notice that I don't have any bleed immunity, and that's basically because usually the Slayer Leech just takes over, but you can get it somewhere on your flask as well. You always want the Corrupted Blood though. That's the biggest one. Inertia, since I'm pathing like this, I'm putting here. I'm converting these 2 nodes to strength as well as the Art of the Gladiator up here. As for jewels, percentage life is the most important one. We have so much flat HP from the strength that every bit of percentage we can get is insane. Also crit multi or fixing some of resistances or maybe fixing your int. Now let's talk about the gem setup. I'm using Divergent Static Strike for the extra chain. However, it's only important that you don't use Phantasmal, otherwise you have too much of a hit rate. You can also use the normal one, which gives you a little bit more skill effect duration, also makes it a lot more cozy. I'm using Divergent Shockwave for the extra cooldown recovery rate, extremely strong. Definitely get one of these. Divergent Pulverize is, I think, the most expensive one of these support gems. The Divergent just gives you even more melee damage at even more of a cost of your attack speed, but the attack speed does not matter for your Shockwave because your Shockwave is cooldown based. So Divergent Pulverize is straight up 70% more damage for your Shockwave. It is the best support gem here by far to scale both of your skills. Then we have Awakened Void Manipulation. The level 5 doesn't really matter. We're not Chaos skills, so we don't get the +1. It's just 39% more damage. Increased critical damage just gives you more crit multi, which we're missing, and the increased critical strikes to supplement your crit. Our single target setup is Frozen Legion in a 4-link. Now, you can also swap it with Static Strike to the 6-link, or you can make like a double 5-link if you want to against single targets. If you don't want to be that socket starved, you can figure that out yourself. It really depends on what content you want to run. We support it with increased critical strikes to make it a little bit more consistent whenever we press. We don't want to press the button and then we don't crit and it just does no damage for no reason. So even though crit damage would seem like it's more damage, this makes it more consistent. Same thing here again, Void Manipulation and Divergent Pulverize, same reason as for the Shockwave. One thing, don't put Shockwave in here as well because Shockwave has an internal cooldown, so you can't proc it twice. If it gets proc from the Static Strike already, it's also on cooldown whenever you use Frozen Legion. Then our Battlemage's Cry setup. There's not much important here, but what you can use is Anomalous Urgent Orders, so nothing here matters. We have instant War Cries because of Call to Arms. So the Warcry speed does not matter. But what this does is it gives increased buff effect, which means you get more damage per spell damage, which is insane. So even though it's just 11%, it's basically like 7-8% more damage for one socket. If you need the socket elsewhere, it's not the end of the world, but it has to be anomalous. It cannot be a normal one. Normal one does nothing. So if you can't get an anomalous, then don't get one at all. And also Berserk. Berserk is just insane. And if we link it with Battlemage's Cry, it is a spell, so it gets procced whenever we exert an attack. Now, this can get a little bit awkward sometimes because you're not proccing it at the perfect time. However, I just like pressing one less button, whatever floats your boat. I also have castman damage taken on an anomalous Molten Shell. Obviously, if you want to, you can get Val Molten Shell, but I don't want to press even more buttons. And I don't want it to steal souls from my Val Haste, so that's why I went for a normal one, just so you know. Then I have a Withering Step set up right here, Anomalous Withering Step, which makes it so you trigger even more Wither stacks. We have no other way to apply Wither. We have no space for Withering Touch. You can theoretically go Ancestral Warchief and Withering Touch, but we have such low attack speed that you won't get any Wither procs. So when you have this with an Enhance, it's going to immediately apply 11 stacks of Wither, which is also what I have in the PoB. Now, if it's level 20, it's only going to be 10, so there's kind of like a breakpoint there. So if you can get a level 2120 Anomalous, that is GG. You want Enhance. Obviously, if you have money for an Awakened Enhance, go ahead. You get, I think, even more. Yeah, I think you get one more Wither stack even, so that would be crazy. Then you're on 12. And then we just put Shield Charge in here as well, so it can also get extra movement speed from the quality from Enhance and faster attacks to make Shield Charge a little bit smoother. And then at the end, we have our Auras, which is going to be Determination, Purity of Elements. On a Strength stacker, getting extra resistances is huge because your suffixes are going to be full of Strength. That's going to take a lot of the place. Also, Crit Multi, we're kind of shy of that. So just getting straight up all resistance is insane. And then obviously, you're also Ailment Immune, which is always great. We have an Enlightened 4 here. I think if you don't have an Enlightened 4, all you have to do is put 1 point here in the Determination has increased Mana Reservation, just so you know. Determination, no-brainer. And Blood and Sand here on top of that. Whenever you're against bosses, you get more damage. Whenever you're mapping, you get more area. Now then we have one more gem open, and this is kind of like a flex slot. It's between Val Haste or Ancestral Warchief. Ancestral Warchief gives you more single target. Val Haste, it's so nice while mapping, right? So what I would probably do is, if you have a replica Frost Breath setup, I would put the Ancestral Warchief in here. Whatever is here, you're not going to change anyways. But then Val Haste is going to be in your clear mace, and this is going to be in your single target mace. This is only if you want to boss like really hard bosses. Otherwise, this is going to do it. But yeah, Ancestral Warchief is theoretically more damage. Now then let's talk about the passive tree. The problem with strength stacker trees is there's so many out there, and they all have their pros and cons. And they all have to kind of play around positioning of split personalities. So this is the one that I chose, but there's a lot of different versions out there. For example, most people have their Lethal Pride down here. Now, some of these Lethal Prides that are good in this region are absurdly expensive. We're talking 30 to 40 divines. So if you have the investment, you can probably make something work, right? But then you have to readjust your whole passive tree, because if I would connect here, obviously my split personalities are not as good. So just know that this is not a monolith. This is completely up to you. I will just show you what I used. Now, what you want is, for example, on Wavering Stance, it's incredibly important. So you always want to be here. You want to get Warrior's Blood. Now, all of these mods are actually good. Usually this is just something you path through, but this is actually an incredible node for this build. We have very high damage hits, so the stun threshold is insane. We get plus 20 to strength, and we get the regen, which counts for our rage regeneration, as well as that we get Heart of the Warrior, which is just incredible. We want to get a lot of increased life. Something you have to understand is a lot of strength stackers, they just care about their damage. You get a ton of flat life from your strength right here, right? Plus 1 life per 2 strength. So we have 2,291 strength. That is like over 1,000 flat life. However, if you don't have enough percentage life, that life doesn't get used. So for example, a single point here would probably give me around 250 life, but usually it would only give me 100. So you want to pick up all of these life nodes. Don't get baited by PoB warriors. Now, something I take for quality of life is exceptional performance right here to get increased skill effect duration. And then as well as that, I get berserking. The 10 maximum rage is nice. The attack speed doesn't really scale my damage. However, it does make it a lot smoother to play. Attack speed is still nice to make it a little bit smoother, have faster shield charge attack speed. But the most important thing here is getting the +1 additional strike, because if you accidentally miss with the static strike, the +1 additional strike will proc your static strike aura, or you just don't have to think about it much. You just click and the strike is going to take care of that. Path of the Warrior I'm only taking because it's in the radius of Lethal Pride. If your Lethal Pride is somewhere else, don't take this note right here. We take 1 Mace Wheel. We definitely want this because it says all damage with maces and scepters inflicts chill. Obviously, if your main weapon will be Replica Frost Breath and you don't care about AoE, you don't need it because you're already chill. But otherwise, chilling on such a high base damage is insane. As for Cluster Jewel, we have weight advantage and Overlord here. Overlord is the only thing that's super important. All the crit clusters, really, really strong. Obviously, life. The strength cluster, pretty self-explanatory. We want the natural authority because we want the War Cry buff effect. This gives you a lot more damage. I think this whole cluster is like 25% more damage or something. We want Call to Arms just so it's not as annoying with the Battlemage's Cry. It's really worth it. Now we have Strength, Effect, and Chaos Res. The Evasion is a complete brick. Your perfect one would obviously have all attributes, which would be incredible. It would fix your intelligence and all of that. And it would have life instead of evasion, but beggars can't be choosers, right? And our split personalities here. As for the medium, you just want 1, and that is Lead by Example, which makes it so you get Onslaught, and it gives you some strength and dexterity, which is nice. And Warning Call, which gives you 100% increased armor straight up, because you have infinite power, so you always get the 100%. Now then, let's talk about an important topic that I will bring up with a lot of builds, but especially on this one, it's quite important. When you open the PoB, you will see a lot of options where you're like, wait, this would be more damage. Just understand that I picked that for a reason. Damage is not everything that matters. You have to actually play the build, and you don't want it to feel like shit. And a comment that I got a lot when I showed the showcase of the build is, I tried this build before, I know it from back in the day, but I never got it to work. It always felt clunky. And that is because people are so hyper-focused on numbers. They're hyper-focused on damage, they're hyper-focused on max hit. That's all they care about. However, there's a lot of choices here that I made for a reason. Don't neglect your quality of life stats. AoE. I understand that this mace here is more damage. However, I like getting 137 AoE. That is just how it is. When you're out of PoB and you see the difference, it is uncanny. Some attack speed is important. I know that you don't scale damage with attack speed. It will not show up on PoB. However, if you have absolutely no attack speed, your shield charge will be slow, and whenever you have to go static strike, it will feel super, super clunky. So stuff like a little bit of attack speed on the tree, Val Haste, Berserk, these all matter. The next one is duration. The best enchant damage-wise would be increased Battlemage's Cry effect. However, so this one here means my static strike goes from 3 seconds to 4.5 seconds, which is very, very nice. I also take this whole cluster here, which costs me 5 points to get another 45 plus 10% more. If you don't take these notes, this is not an Autobomber anymore. You have to press static strike every 3 seconds instead of every 6.2 seconds. That is a big, big deal. As well as that +1 strikes. I already talked about this, but that's the reason I take this cluster. The attack speed is very nice, extra maximum rage, but usually it's not good enough to take. However, you get the attack mastery for +1 additional strikes. This means whenever you hit with your static strike and you miss, maybe you shield charge into a pack and the shield charge did enough damage to kill the white mob and now you're missing. Well, it doesn't matter because the extra strike takes care of that and you still proc your static strike. So what I'm trying to say here is, obviously you have to still get your damage. You still have to get your defenses. But once you hit a certain currency threshold, quality of life is more important than double one-shotting an enemy, because most things will be dead anyways, unless you do certain content that maybe this build isn't even for. So just keep that in mind. For budget, you can probably cut some of these things. Just know that it won't feel like you see it in the video. Then let's quickly talk about leveling. For leveling, I used Firegrass's Twink leveling guide over on Maxroll. He has one for every class over there. Basically, we use Val Smite as a deck stacker, which is probably the most busted setup you can have currently. All you need is some dexterity leveling gear and a 1 with nothing unique jewel to get whole palm technique, and you're going to absolutely destroy the whole game. It was already busted before Val Smite was a thing, but now it's just completely something else. So definitely check out the guide. I will link it down in the description. At the end, I want to quickly talk about a end game upgrade if you want to put this to the next level. Now, obviously, I don't have any currency for this right now. Most people won't. I just want to throw it out there because it is completely busted theoretically for this build. And that is Original Sin. So you can only get this one if you have a certain unique relic and you have to do a no-hit run. So you cannot be hit a single time throughout your run. And then you get this ring. There are currently 9 on the market and they start at 2 mirrors. So you can already see why I didn't include it in the main guide. However, I just want to bring this up because this has absurd potential for strength stacking specifically. First thing I want to point out is you can actually use Explodey Flask. Slayer doesn't get Explodey like Occultist, but you can still do it if you get the ring, but you can only do it if you get the ring because Replica Alberons makes it so you cannot deal non-chaos damage. So obviously, if you don't have the ring, you cannot do this. The second fun thing you could do is you can literally stack them all, right? You can theoretically go Brutus Light Sprinkler. I don't even know if it would be the best idea, but usually you have to choose between Fire Scaling or Chaos Scaling with Alberons. This way you don't have to. If anything, you can definitely use the Strength Stacker Relic if you drop one. So yeah, all elemental damage converted to chaos damage, pretty broken, as well as that nearby enemies' chaos resistance is 0, which would also mean you can replace something like Despair or any sort of penetration, opening up for new possibilities. And yeah, other than that, I mean, this build is not even close to finished. You can get an Emperor's Mastery, you could get better jewels, you could get a second percentage strength ring, right? You could get better corruptions. This amulet is definitely not perfect. This weapon is not even close to perfect. So if you want a build that you can play for the whole league, a strength stacker is a big investment sink. With that said, I hope you liked the video. I hope you could maybe learn a thing or two, even if you end up not playing the build. And so yeah, but that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do videos like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. And yeah, absolute blast to play. So much fun. From here on out, we're going to do more fun builds like this again. Less meta builds like Winter Orb or like accuracy stacking or whatever. Yeah, back to the roots, I guess. This league has been so much fun overall. I'm really, really hyped and motivated again to explore the game. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.